Hello, welcome to our RPA Virtual Career Insights. The idea is to create insight from former players into different industries and businesses and roles. To date, as a recap, in 2020, we've covered property development with Tim Visser, a career in the fitness industry with Ben Grotting and Mel Dean, business startup with Ollie Cohn, working in schools, and a career in coaching with Phil Dowson, Rob Webber, and Jimmy Gopperth. And today's webinar is about a career in the police force. So absolutely delighted to be joined by Chief Inspector Richard Gentry. Richard is Chief Inspector of Harm Reduction and Communities and has a background mainly in response policing and neighbourhood. Also joining us, Scott Wilson, former Newcastle Falcons player and England Saxons. He played 80 games for the Falcons, retired through injury in 2018, unfortunately, at the age of 24. Lads, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time and looking forward to getting stuck in. Just before we start, just a brief background for the listeners as to how we all know each other. I was working I am a development manager for Falcons and Sale Sharks. And when I started in 2018, talking with Scotty was interested in a career in the police force. Scott already knew yourself, Rich, and Scott introduced me to you. And you were really helpful, and it was great to get you into the club to speak to 5 players who were interested in a career in the police force. And you came in, we had a coffee, you spoke about the enrolment process, what the day-to-day of the job's like, and answered questions from the guys. So Scott, if I could just start with you. So you haven't been out of professional rugby for too long, but one thing that kind of really resonated with me when speaking to you on the phone was you said you didn't think you'd ever find something you enjoyed as much as you enjoyed your rugby, and you think you found that in the police force.
Yeah, I do. To be honest, it was a big shock when I, from first starting the police, going through the first, I think it was about 6 months, doing the university side of stuff, sort of learning the trade, and then actually getting out on shift, doing the response policing. It's brilliant when you're out there doing it, helping people out, and just have an understanding of the processes that the police do to give a good service as well.
Yeah. So Scott, what was your actual journey like from? So obviously you identified you wanted to go into the force, and then you knew you had to retire on advice from the medical side, the doctors, etc. What was kind of the your journey from player to actually getting into the police force?
Yeah, so obviously got that bad news that I had to call my career short. I think I was only 24 at the time. I was quite lucky in a way though, because the previous season I had been in touch with Rich, and he had got me in. He was a sergeant at the neighbourhood in town at the time, and he took me out for a few ride-alongs. Basically got to see how it functioned, how the team worked in the centre of town, and it pretty much got me hooked straight away. I really enjoyed what it was about. I really enjoyed the sort of team aspect, especially going from rugby into the police and sort of keeping that as well. It really interests me. So I was quite lucky. If I never had that year before being forced to retire, I wouldn't have known what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So from that, it was an unfortunate period because they weren't recruiting at that time when I retired. So I had to fill my time, and I think it was just approximately about a year I was going through. It took me from putting my application in to getting confirmation that I was accepted, and pretty much got a start date.
Yeah.
So just had to fill some time in from there, but going through the full process, the search assessments, the sort of application stuff. To be honest, it was really tough going. I never really had anything like that.
You were doing some labouring, weren't you, in the meantime?
Yeah. So I filled my time in doing labouring, sort of on-site stuff, whatever I could learn really, because that was going to be my second option, getting into a trade, most probably joinery, because that's what got my interest more. But I also had it in the back of my mind that I was always going to go through the application process, even though it might not have been a first time I get in. I was still going to try and sort of try and get through that way. So it was a tough time, the full year doing, going from the initial interview to the search assessment. Then I found out that I failed that by 1%, unfortunately, so it was close. But then, but because I was so close, they let me sort of jump ahead, and I was able to do the next one a couple of months down the line.
Brilliant.
Got through there, and then managed to get a start date.
Great stuff. And Richard, just what's kind of your story and background into joining the force? How did that happen? And just give us a brief bit about your journey, please.
Yeah, I was one of those people who always knew I wanted to join from about the age of 14. So it was always something on my radar. I'm not from a police family. As far as I know, no one's been in the police really in the family. And I hadn't had much exposure to it at all, good or bad, really. So I knew I wanted to join, but I was at that stage where I was going through education and what have you. And I wanted to leave to join. And I was convinced by my parents, go to university and do that instead. And my mother will say even now, she thought I would grow out of it, as she put it. Right. And I would just get to a point where I thought, no, I'll go and do something else. More academic or whatever. And instead, after 2 years at university, I said, I don't want to be here. So I left. And similar to Scott in the sense of the recruitment process was quite different when I joined to Scott, although there were similarities. And the main one being I applied and I had to wait quite a while. So I failed the first application and got in the second time, which was sort of 2 years down the line. I'd been doing a security guard job up to then. Got in, bit different to Scott's sort of learning process, but essentially you did a sort of a learning phase where you legislation, powers policies, stuff like that. And then you basically got kicked out. You had a tutor for 10 weeks and you go on a response shift. And I did that for the first 7 or 8 years of my career. I was on response. I mean, we'll probably come on to it, but while you're there, even if you're on response, there's other options within there that are worth thinking about. It's not just you're there and you're stuck.
Right.
And then did my sergeants, got promoted to sergeant and was given a team up in the north of Newcastle. Did that for a year, went into neighbourhood policing for a couple of years, 2.5 years, which is where I met Scott. So when we were there, he would come out with us sometimes using these community ride-alongs, get an insight to the job. And obviously that's where our link started. And then since then, got promoted to inspector, went back to a shift of response policing, which is what it's always been my sort of first love in the job. Always will be. I'd always envisaged myself going back there. And that was about a year ago. And then from there, around 4 months ago, my boss had to go off on the sick and I covered for him as the chief inspector for about the last 4 months. And then literally 2 weeks ago, they set up a new department, harm reduction and community engagement, and that's where I'm now sitting. So over that time, you're talking 13 years, although I've remained in uniform pretty much as people would see it. You obviously know of your peers and everything, and we've all got very different experiences for our time in that 13 years, that's for sure.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Sorry, Scotty, back to you. Just how did you kind of identify a career in the police force was for you? And was this literally something clicked in your head one day when you were walking off the training pitch, or did you kind of always have it in your mind?
Pretty much, like I said, I think in total I'd done about 8 to 10 potential ride-alongs with Rich and his team. I think just through the experience I gained through there, it just sort of kept getting my interest. But what I liked is that I spoke to loads of different people, like people that are new in service, that were loving it. They were really keen about getting everybody else and talking good about it. And then I talked to some more sort of experienced heads, and they sort of informed me how it's changed over the time. And there's the sort of differences from even 10 years ago, 20 years ago to now. And then, so I got a bit of balance. I got to know how it has changed to what they're focused on now, and how people are keen to sort of progress what the police are up to now.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've lost Rich temporarily, but hopefully he'll be back.
Yeah.
Scotty, what is the kind of process of enrolment that you went through from kind of, I suppose, for you identifying you wanted a career in the police force, and then you said you did the ride-alongs with Rich. What can you just explain so if there's a player sitting watching this, you know, what is the actual process that you went through to be where you are today?
I think, well, at the start, I was pretty proactive. I sort of made the contact with the police. I got speaking to loads of people about it as well. And I think that's one thing they quite liked when I put my application forward, that I kind of went out my way to get in touch with them and to basically show my interest.
Yeah.
I mean, I was far from probably standard that they wanted when first applying, but I went out my way and sort of asked for help. I mean, Rich helped me with, he gave me some stuff to read up on, saying what the police look for and stuff like that. And then I was in touch with some other people as well who sort of helped me and sort of advised me about the application process, said what they kind of look for and the different areas and aspects that they're sort of judged on as well. So yeah, I went out my way. That's the big one I think that they liked. That proactive side, and actually showing that you want to be a part of it, not just the simple thing of sticking an application in, having the stuff on the application to back up pretty much.
Rich, I asked, sorry, I think we lost you for a sec, good to have you back, but we asked Scotty what his enrolment process was from being a player to where he is now, for any players who, you know, think of doing the same thing. Has the process changed at all since kind of, I know Scotty's was about 2 years ago. Has it changed, or is it still exactly the same?
The PCDA sort of program that Scott's on, it's still a bit of an evolving process, so it's a set process, but what the actual, Scott will probably have noticed that some of what the student officers are doing isn't exactly mirrored by what he's doing. It's maybe different time scales, different things like that. The actual application is pretty consistent. As I heard Scotty at the end there, as he's saying, we're always oversubscribed. Almost every police force always is.
Right,
so it's the ways that you make yourself stand out as part of that process, and that will be that when you go for your interviews and so on, do you have an awareness of what your local policing look like? And obviously this won't just be for people in Northumbria, but what does your local policing look like? What, you know, if you police and crime commissioners plans, and that's not to say you have to intensely study everything, but to show you have that awareness and interest in it beyond that. I mean, Scott will have naturally brought a lot of qualities from his playing to that will have helped him through that assessment process, that sort of, you know, that team ethos, that, you know, willingness to put yourself out there and all that. But the recruitment itself is pretty standardized across the forces.
Okay. Because Scotty, I think you said sorry.
I mean, it is worth saying. Sorry, I was just going to say, it is worth saying, one of the things that is a bit of a driver for forces at the minute is obviously increasing diversity within the police force. Northumbria, we're not completely representative of the community in the sense of a lot of the police force still looks like me, and yet we don't have other ethnic groups or properly represented within the force. So each force will have a positive action link, which is somebody who can assist you with that early part. And a lot of the thinking behind that is that when you come from certain backgrounds, yes, you may want to be in the police force, but you may not have any peers around you that are either thinking of it, or any family or friends who you know are in it. And they can sometimes assist with that guidance before you start applying. They're people who you can get in touch with.
Okay. And Rich, just if a player's sitting there watching this webinar in a similar position to what Scott was in a couple of years ago, what could players be doing whilst they're playing? If someone's identified, I want a career in the police force, and they're still playing, what can they be doing whilst they're playing in terms of Is it doing a particular course you'd recommend, or is it trying to do kind of the work experience side of things where Scotty did the ride-alongs with you? Is there anything else that players can be doing?
It would be a mix of them. I mean, there is basic educational requirements around the MBQ level and so on. The best way would be to link in with your local force and see exactly what their recruitment looks like, but making sure well in advance that you tick that. Now, that may mean that while you're playing, you go and do a college course that gives you that level, because you haven't got it through your education at that point. There's always the option to link in with the force. There's a lot of engagement events that we do that you can obviously sign up to. In Northumbria, it's a prerequisite that before you put in your application, you go and engage in one of these events. But again, it's not just the force that runs that in isolation. There's larger ones where, like say, Positive Action Recruitment or something will run one. There was one the other week where it was a lot of forces together for different characteristics. You can certainly approach your local forces and see what their policies are around things like ride-alongs or community engagement, sort of coming out with, whatever they do on that side, because it will be slightly different from all. There's obviously the volunteer work. Now, how conducive that is to playing is maybe limited, but, something like the specials is always an option where you work, in theory, a very limited amount of hours a month, which you could certainly fit in on a full-time job because it's what everybody does. Now, whether clubs would be happy for you to do that and the risk that it carries, potentially not, I don't know. There's things like that to have a look at outside, but making sure that when that application goes in, or when you're at the point, a bit like Scott did, where he had that build up to it, you know that you're in the best possible position to apply and actually get through, because it will be oversubscribed, and you will be in a pool of 5 people for 4 jobs or 5 people for 3 jobs, Yeah.
And Scotty, on it being oversubscribed, I think you actually had to apply for a different force, didn't you? Because Northumbria was oversubscribed. So how did that happen?
That was going to be a potential that we thought about, but it ended up not being the case. So I only ever applied for Northumbria at that point.
Well, I suppose you have to be prepared. That might be a route you have to go down.
Yeah, exactly. Because depends when they open it for recruitment. Yeah.
And Scott, what's your date?
Especially if you're looking.
Go on, Rich.
So I was just going to say, especially if you're living in an area, I mean, understand your local police force and understand what the size of it is. Yeah. So in the northeast, we have Durham, Cleveland, Northumbria. Now, Durham is a really high achieving force, but Durham's entire force is smaller than one of our areas. Okay. So that gives you a context as to what sort of staffing levels they have and so on, and opportunities there. Yeah. And Northumbria is a huge force and massive and things like that. So you may have to look at where the recruitment's at for the force and the planning, because you may have to think, actually, do I simply go that little bit further away? Which again, arguably the players and people involved in rugby wouldn't be out of their realms to have to move for a job. Yeah. And maybe actually a lot of the players would be more willing to than some other people who are applying, which is potentially opens a lot more doors for them.
Yeah. Okay. Scott, what's a day-to-day like for you then? Is it? I mean, I suppose it varies each and every day, but is there kind of a typical day you can give us an idea of? Is it what you expected as well, or is it totally different? And just an example of what your day might look like.
So yeah, pretty much taking it from the start. So the PCTA course that I'm on is a 3-year university course. Pretty much starts the first year with foundations, getting your sort of legislations, your powers, and the safeguarding element. You learn all that, so that takes up the pretty much first 6 months, and then you go out for a 10-week period on response. You're getting looked after by a tutor. They're keeping you right. And during that 10 weeks, you have to submit a number of evidence that basically tick off 10 points that you've covered. When you've done this, you can come independent patrol status, which means you can go out on your own. You can deal with situations on your own. Preferably, you're always going to be double crewed, but there are certain situations where you are single crewed. So, I mean, if you take a normal day, depends what time you start. Normally you do four on, 4 off. So you do 4 day shifts and then 4 night shifts. 2 day shifts and then 2 night shifts.
Okay.
And then you'll have 4 days off. So you have a first day shift start 7 o'clock in the morning. You do 12 hours, so 7 at night. And I mean, it totally depends what's happening that day. I mean, with COVID happening, it has been quite quiet, but then there can be days where it just completely kicks off. So you never know what you're going to do. There's some days I'll go in early. I'll be in the office for 6:30, and then I'll just be walking in and they'll be like, "Oh, Scott, grab some keys. We've got a job for you." And then you'd be out before everybody else is in the office. So whereas there's some days you might not have a job in for the first half a day, and then you'll just be looking at your crimes that you've been screened in from previously. So it is a pretty unpredictable job, but when you get them jobs, and especially the grade ones, you get that bit of buzz, the sort of bit of adrenaline rush as well, which you can kind of relate to rugby, because that's what we used to, right? Used to going out on a pitch and taking what comes at you. With this, you get a call, you might get as much information as you can. You get to the job and it'll be something completely different.
Right.
So that's the thing. It's just so unpredictable. I think that's what I enjoy about the job is, right, you never know what's going to happen. But then with me being new in service, I don't know everything and never claim to know everything. So it's where that team aspect comes back in. I've been put in with a really good team. There's a good mixture of sort of young heads that have been in 5, 6, 7 years, with a bunch of the older boys that have been in, say, 15 to 20 years. So you can speak to anybody, and they'll give you advice. They'll be able to come down and help you at jobs, and everyone's willing to get stuck into other people's jobs. So they come and help you out when they can.
Great.
So and then obviously it switches over to night time, but then again it's the same. It's just unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. So
so that ties into my question. Next question I was going to ask you, actually, because I was going to ask you what the comparisons are between being a player and working with the police force. I suppose is that kind of, you touched on it there, but being part of a team is a big one, and that unpredictability and having to be adaptable. And there's, I suppose, all kind of crossovers from being a professional sportsman or woman.
Yeah, definitely. Like you're on a rugby pitch, you trust the people to the side of you to make that tackle, to help you hit a ruck. It's pretty much the same as policing.
Yeah.
Right. You're going into jobs where you don't know what's happened. Right. You're listening to other people on the radio going to jobs. You're keeping an ear out for them. So if they did end up going to a grade one and a situation becomes violent, you know what's happening. You know where they are. You can go and help them leave your job, or vice versa. So there's a lot of trust. Well, you have to trust the people on your shift pretty much, because you can be going into violent situations where you could potentially be quite outnumbered, with weapons being used as well. So that's the sort of realistic side you have to expect when you're going into the job.
Danger. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you still got the gum shield in the pocket to this day?
yeah, keep it safe nearby.
Rich, just could I just ask you on kind of salary expectations? So for a player that was kind of going from being a player, and if they're lucky enough to get into the force, kind of where do their salary expectations start, and where can they go to?
It's I mean, we have incremental pay, so you'd come in, and when you're a fully signed off constable, you'd be sort of just over 20 grand a year, just over 21, and that has incremental pay scales. So if you stayed as a police constable for your entire service, your pay would still go up, as in not just on inflation, in general. And it end up topping out at around £40,000 if you were a PC for your entire career, or a DC, or at that sort of rank. You then obviously within the force, you've got this structure of rank, and as you jump each time, there's pay increases, some marginal from one to the other, some quite significant. So the rank that I was substantive at recently, inspector, starts at around 52.5. My current rank's around 58. The next one, which would be superintendent, it starts at 70. So you know, it's got the capacity. If you go say up to chief superintendent, which is before you would then make the jump into sort of chief officer team, okay, you're talking to the top end of 80,000-90,000 pounds if you went that way. Your basic salary at all points, there are other ways where it can be increased. So Scott, for example, will be receiving money because he works night shift. Right. So his pay will be an increase on that. There's bank holidays, things like that, which can make a bit of a difference. There's always overtime and things like that. You know, certainly over Christmas, some of the officers had to be reined back in from signing up for quite so much. But you know, it's nice to have at least one day off a month, and it's certainly needed it. So there are other ways. You're talking starting around 20, and with no rank increase, like I say, 40 plus, and then little bits on top of that. Okay. It all just depends a lot of the time what your role is. So if you go into neighbourhoods, you're probably not working as many night shifts. You stay on response, like Scott, half of his time's night shift. Okay. Same in custody, same in places like that.
Yeah. And Rich, do you feel that sportsmen and sportswomen make for a successful career in the police force?
I think there's always been a historic link of it, and Scott will know one of his boss at the time was had a background in policing, and there's always been that link, and it's that link around sort of teamwork, which naturally lends itself to the police. There's something to be said for being passionate about what you do. Now, I played rugby, and I certainly didn't play it at the level that we're talking about here. You have to have a hell of a passion to then go and take that to that next level, on top of ability and everything else. And I don't doubt that plays a role, but you have to have that drive to do something like that. And the service is a vocation. I would say to any player who was looking at it, or anybody, in fact, who I've spoken to before about joining the police forces, I think at its worst day, it's still the best job in the world. I'm not quite jaded enough to have changed that opinion yet. However, it's not worth doing for the salary or the pension. And we have a very good salary, I think. We have a very good pension. If that is your motivation for joining the police, I think you'll struggle, because frankly, there are easier jobs you can get paid as much doing. That's interesting. And so it has to be something you really want to do. I think that dynamic thinking, and Scott said there around, you know, you've got to trust the people deciding. You've got to trust the people to make split-second decisions. And it's not just around violence or something like that necessarily. And, you know, you're presented with somebody, there's always somebody bigger out there, even than Scott, and, you know, that could take you. But it's more around that decision-making, around safeguarding, and that ability to assimilate information so quickly. And if someone like Scott, who's a prop forward, can do it, then I have no doubt that some of the backs can do it. So it's they're much more responsible.
They don't like the physical stuff, the backside.
It is dynamic thinking, and sport will give you that.
Okay, great. Scotty, what's your?
But there is definitely a link.
Yeah, okay. And Scott, what's the biggest challenges been? Is it just kind of taking on board all the new information and, you know, a pretty fast rate of knots, or would they be the main challenges? Anything else?
Yeah, there's just loads of information to take in. That's the thing. There's so much officers are expected to know by the public as well, right? They kind of expect everything from an officer, but it's down to sort of safeguarding your powers, your policies, your legislations, trying to embed that. And then on the other hand, you've got the police systems you need to learn, which I think they're probably invented before I was born, but they're a brilliant system. But they take a lot of getting used to. But there's just so much, because I'm still learning areas of the police that even I've been in a year now, well, November. So I started on RPT March last year. So there's still areas of the police I'm learning now. So, right, down to the sort of learning bits about the street triage. I was on a shift with them last week, which is the mental health side of stuff to help constables. They go about with a trained mental health nurse who helps police on that aspect. There's pulses that help with searches, so you can be doing big area searches where you've got to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb to going through houses, right, looking at every aspect of that. There's obviously the firearms bit that everyone knows about and the dogs bit, especially being at the Falcons. You see them training the dogs at the Falcons sometimes. It's brilliant watching them, but even still, I reckon I'm going to learn a lot more. Even with the next 2 years I've got doing this PCDA course before I qualify. So yeah, no, it's brilliant.
Guys, just to wrap up, because this is my fault, we've got 3 minutes left, so we're on a timer now, unfortunately. My next question was going to be any good stories you can share with us, but I've crossed that out because I know this is classified. So I'll move on to the next one. Just the last kind of question, guys, just to kind of wrap up, just for Scotty and Rich, what advice would you give to current players who are currently playing now, who are in your position, Scott, which you were in a couple of years ago? Looking back now, if you could do anything differently, or is there anything more you could have done? What advice would you give to those people sitting there wanting to go into the police force?
I probably wish I knew about it earlier. It wasn't until speaking with Rob Hawkin that I got sort of interested in it, and then I got to go on the ride-alongs. But then, yeah, I'd do more of that. Just be proactive and sort of get involved with it as much as I could. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Rich?
All I would say, look, wherever your local force is, look at the other jobs within the police. But I know everybody has this thing about joining as a constable, and that's absolutely the main of what we do. There's loads of police staff roles, which are immensely highly skilled. Some players and people with that sort of different elements to their thinking will be able to bring things to. There's also various other routes in. So obviously, Scott's on the PCDA, the degree program. There's other ways to join, some of which are dependent force to force, but don't maybe just get completely tunnel vision about I must join in this traditional way, which is fine for most people. But if you're put off by something of that role that maybe Scott's doing, it doesn't mean that there isn't another role in the police service for you, either civilianized or as a police officer. And it's probably a lot broader now than what people realize.
Okay, we've got 1 minute, so I'm going for one more question, lads. One, thing you most enjoy, something you most like about the job, and something you least like about the job, both of you. I suppose you said, Scott, the unpredictability.
Yeah, it's just different every day. You don't know what to expect. I mean, you could be going into a normal office job and you sat at a computer all day. This isn't the case. You're out and about. You could be driving about all day and going into different houses. Yeah.
Rich?
Yeah, the traditional answer is paperwork or something like that. But and there is a lot of that, and Scott will be learning that now. It's to be, I suppose one of the biggest pressures will be to be aware, and it will be similar to playing for the clubs, I would imagine, is you're the representative of that entire organisation. So if Scott went and misbehaved in a nightclub as a player, it was a Newcastle Falcon went and misbehaved as a player. Don't underestimate the scrutiny that you'd be under doing this role, because whatever you do, it will be the police officer did it. So there's that added pressure to that, but still the best job.
Great. Guys, listen, thanks so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. That's really helpful, great information and advice. Really do appreciate your time. So thank you both very much. It's much appreciated.
No bother. You're welcome.
Cheers, lads.